A German officer stood at the door of a quiet house and asked the woman inside a very simple question. Who else lives in this house? Yet right on the floor above him, a Jewish widow and her children were listening to every word through the floorboards. Almost certain they were about to die, they held their breath and waited. But the officer learned nothing, because the woman in front of him simply smiled, pointed to her ears, and shook her head. The woman was completely deaf, and she was using it deliberately to save 3 lives right under that officer's nose. That woman was a princess. She was descended from Queen Victoria, and she was the mother of the man who would one day marry the Queen of England. In other words, the mother of Prince Philip himself. And here's the strange part. By that point, neither the public nor most of her own family knew what she had just done, because the world had already made a habit of looking away from her. This is the story of a woman who vanished 3 separate times in a single lifetime, and of how her final disappearance turned her into a hero no one saw coming. Her name was Alice, in 1885, inside Windsor Castle. She was born right into the heart of the British royal family, but something was wrong, and no one could quite work out what. The baby was very late to speak. The words that came out were slow and distorted. In those days, this was immediately blamed on one thing: intellectual disability. People thought the little princess was simply slow, until, at the age of 8, the truth finally came out. Alice was not mentally disabled. She was completely deaf from birth. With her mother's great insistence, she achieved something extraordinary. She learned to read lips, and not in just one language, either. She read English and German off people's lips, then added French and Greek on top. Languages she couldn't hear. She spoke simply by watching people's mouths. But even after it was understood how intelligent she was, that first stigma never left her life. People always doubted what she was capable of. This was the first time she disappeared, as that girl everyone looked down on, hidden behind her deafness. When she turned 17, Alice fell in love with Prince Andrew of Greece and married him, and so she became a member of the Greek royal family, a princess of Greece and Denmark. She had 4 daughters and 1 son. That boy was none other than Prince Philip, who would later marry Queen Elizabeth of England. But Alice's life did not go like a palace fairy tale. The Greek royal family was sent into exile. The family was scattered, tossed from country to country. And in the early 1930s, Alice suffered a severe psychological breakdown. The doctors of the time diagnosed her with schizophrenia, so much so that even most famous psychologist of the era, Sigmund Freud, became involved in her case. Alice was committed against her own will to an asylum in Switzerland. She was torn away from her family, from her children. Little Philip did not see his mother for years. Even where his mother was kept hidden from the child. This was the second time she vanished. In the first, she had become invisible behind her deafness. This time, behind the walls of an asylum, she was erased, even by her own family. For most people, this story would end right here, in the dark. But for Alice, real life was only just beginning. Years later, Alice slowly recovered and walked out of that hospital a completely different person. Palaces and jewels no longer meant a thing to her. She returned to Greece. Then, in 1941, the Germans occupied Greece. Almost her entire family fled to safe countries. But Alice did not go. She stayed. She worked with the Red Cross, set up soup kitchens, opened shelters for orphaned children. Paying no mind at all to the curfew, she handed out food to the children and the policemen on the streets. When someone warned her that she could be shot dead one day, the answer she gave summed up her character. She said, "They tell me you don't hear the shot that kills you, and in any case, I am deaf. So why should I worry about it?" But the real great test came in 1943. That year, the Nazis began rounding up the Jews of Greece. Around 60,000 Greek Jews were sent to the death camps. Nearly 80% of the country's Jewish population was wiped out. When the raids in Athens grew truly brutal, the Cohen family, one of the old friends of the royal family, knocked on Alice's door in desperation. It was the widow Rachel Cohen and her children who came, and Alice did not hesitate for a single second. Alice took the Cohen family into her own home, and what's more, the house she lived in was just a few steps from a Gestapo headquarters. She hid them for over a full year. The penalty for being caught was clear: death. Even so, every single day she went upstairs and carried food to them with her own hands. She sat beside Rachel, speaking in Greek, holding her hand through those hours full of fear. Every knock at the door could be the Gestapo. Every German patrol meant the beginning of the end, and what was feared came to pass. In the end, the Gestapo turned up at the door. They took Alice in for questioning. They asked who was living in her house, about the rumors that she was hiding Jews. Alice simply smiled and pointed to her ears. When the officer raised his voice, she lifted her hands helplessly into the air, pretending she couldn't read his lips. The deafness that had humiliated her for a lifetime, that everyone had looked down on, had now turned into a weapon that saved 3 human lives. The officer left the house in frustration, completely unaware of how close he had come to the truth. Upstairs, the Cohen family owed their lives to this woman who held her humanity above her fear. And Alice never told anyone what she had done. Not even her own family. The whole thing was only discovered many years later, by chance. When the war ended, Alice vanished once again, but this time by her own choice. She sold off every last one of her remaining jewels, and with that money, in a poor neighborhood of Athens, she founded an order of nuns, a convent, and an orphanage. She herself put on a gray nun's habit. She spent the rest of her life in a simple existence, in prayer and in service to others. In 1947, she attended the wedding of her son Philip to Princess Elizabeth. She was the only nun at the most lavish royal wedding in history. And in 1953, when she came to the coronation of her daughter-in-law Elizabeth, she was wearing that same simple nun's habit once again. This was her 3rd disappearance. The first 2 had been forced upon her. This time, she had chosen to become invisible herself. And perhaps the most striking truth is this: it was precisely because she chose to become invisible in this way that she was able to carry out the bravest act of her life. A woman no one paid any attention to had done the very thing no one else dared to do. Alice died on the 5th of December, 1969, at the age of 84. She had wished to be buried in Jerusalem, on the Mount of Olives, but the British royal family first laid her to rest at Windsor. It took a full 19 years for her wish to be honored. In 1988, Prince Philip finally moved his mother's remains to Jerusalem. Even then, the true scale of her courage was not fully known. In 1994, a quarter of a century after her death, Israel granted her the highest honor given to non-Jews, righteous among the nations. A woman thought to be stupid because she was born deaf, locked away in an asylum and erased from her own family, who then withdrew from the world of her own free will. 3 times in her life, she was made invisible. But here is the truth: everything that made her invisible, in the end made her a hero history must never forget. Again and again, the world looked away from Alice, but it was the world that was wrong.